لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Is the audio good?
Yes.
Alhamdulillah. My name is Salwa and I am the Educational Director here at Maristan. For those of you who are welcome to Maristan. The literal meaning of Maristan is an institution of healing, and they were the first treatment centers for treating psychological illnesses in our Islamic history. But our organization, Maristan, is a clinical, educational, and research-based initiative inspired by the historical function of traditional Maristans. So our goal is to revive these Islamic traditional functions of Maristans by leading professional clinical care, education, and research in advancing holistic mental and spiritual wellness. We're still in our infancy. We're actually less than a year old, but alhamdulillah, despite how young we are, we've been able to provide educational and healing circles at least once a month. And we've soft launched our clinic, alhamdulillah, in the Bay Area. And as of recent, we've also launched our 500 Imams project. So maybe you've heard of it last year, but alhamdulillah, now we can officially say that our first training is March 11 and 12. So if you are an Imam, if you're a religious leader, if you're a youth director, if you're a principal of an Islamic school, this training is for you. If you know others who might be interested as well, it's a 2-day virtual training. If you would like to register, it's tinyurl.com/500imams. This has been a project that we've been working on for years. It's evidence-driven. It's from the Stanford Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab. Alhamdulillah, it's a really, really wonderful resource for the community. And the goal, inshallah, is to save lives and have our religious leaders, inshallah, work as first responders. So today we're here for a learning circle. And what Maristan's learning circles are, the focus is to provide regular community-focused educational programs to support the holistic, spiritual, and mental health needs of our whole community. With these communal gatherings, we connect with scholars, mental health professionals, and spiritual leaders to illuminate our path to well-being. So we do have, inshallah, some expectations to make sure that we all benefit from this time. Number one, just making our intention that we're here to seek knowledge, inshallah, for Allah's sake. This is the difference between our learning and healing circles. Our learning circles are very much education-based. So inshallah, we can all benefit and take away something. We want to treat everybody with respect. We want to listen with compassion and curiosity. We want to share our words or our silent presence. We want to withhold judgment. And in this space, we do not want to share opposing views. And we want to keep our comments relevant so we can be mindful of everybody's time. And it goes without saying that we will obviously not tolerate any disrespect or derogatory commentary. So we're here today to learn about our Black Muslim brothers and sisters' experiences, their mental health and well-being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, "O mankind, we have created you male and female and appointed you races and tribes that you may know one another. Surely the noblest among you in the sight of Allah is the most God-fearing of you. Allah is all-knowing and all-aware." As Muslims, we're composed of diverse languages, experiences, cultures, but we all have the same goal, which is the pleasure of Allah. As we know, February is Black History Month, and it should be of interest to every Muslim, especially in America. It is a liberal estimate that at least 20% of the Africans enslaved in the Americas were Muslim, and in some areas up to 40%. Islam in America as it stands today would not be the way it is without African-American influence. As Muslims, our story in this country didn't begin with the coming of immigrants, but with the lives of the courageous African-American slaves whose blood, sweat, and tears were instrumental in building this country. Their struggle is our struggle. To this day, about 1/3 of Muslims in America identify as Black, and more than 50% of people in Africa are Muslim. Black Muslims established Islam in America, and without them, we wouldn't see and experience Islam in America as we do today. So inshallah, this Black History Month, we want to listen. We want to learn about our Black Muslim brothers and sisters, their history, their experiences, and how to support their mental health and well-being. So these are our objectives today. The first half of the conversation is going to be learning about the Black Muslim experience in America. And then the second half of the conversation is going to be about the solutions to attain wellness, inshallah. And with the agenda for the first half, we're going to discuss the history of Islam in America, and we're also going to discuss the unique pains of the Black Muslim community. And inshallah, in the second half, we're going to offer solutions both for the Black Muslim community and the rest of the community to support our Black Muslim brothers and sisters, inshallah. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sister Tephiny Jones, who is actually one of our Maristan therapists. She's a compassionate, conscientious, and dedicated professional with extensive knowledge of offering advice, support, rehabilitation, and guidance to clients who have experienced trauma or hardship. She has a broad-based experience in counseling, social work, and psychotherapy. She offers exemplary case management skills along with expertise in diagnosing and treating emotional disturbances, mental health disorders, and crisis interventions. She is continually looking to enhance her knowledge and further develop her skills to be a better clinician to contribute to the overall growth of the social services and mental health industry. She's also an associate clinical social worker, professional with a master's in social work from the University of South California, and it's focused on community, organization, planning, and administration. She also has a bachelor from UC Berkeley in social welfare and minor in education and public policy. She also, mashallah, has an MBA from Pepperdine University, and she's a doctoral student right now, mashallah, and she's giving us her time in social work. And we also have with us our wonderful Dr. Zakiyyah Hyatt, who this is her second time joining us. She was in our healing circle last month. She's a psychologist, consultant, advocate, and she provides interactive sessions for clients, children, adolescents, and adults. She focuses on center approach in both Islamic and Western culture and around any type of relationship concern that needs to be addressed. She believes that clients can expect greater success when they are serious about working in their life issues. So without further ado, we are looking forward to your discussion. Thank you so much for being here with us, Dr. Zakiyyah and Sister Tephiny.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'd like to begin with Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, maliki yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, ihdina siratal mustaqim. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Ameen. I'd like to begin my topic area specifically on point to the historical landscape of Black Muslims in America, both male and female. So I'm hoping that we can get a clearer understanding of what took place in the past and tie it into current time. So Black History Month for many Black Muslims in America didn't just begin at the ship or landing on the plantation. It began with the Muslims and non-Muslims making that dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a salvation to come. Even though they may not have experienced the salvation at that particular time of suffering, that dua sort of passed on, and they believe these, the Black Muslims at that particular time believe that awakening time in the 60s and the 70s were the times where they became aware and they made their shahada to make change in society. Now, change came at a price. It wasn't easy. Now, we're looking at change at the viewpoint of the Midwest, the East Coast, and the South. Now, the South wasn't the South that we see today. The South was the Bible Belt. So with that, Muslims suffered. And but even though through suffering, Their goal was to break the chains of slavery off of their head, off of their minds. Yes, there was some psychological damage and emotional effects due to their experiences in their neighborhood. First of all, I'd like to thank Allah for the opportunity to share this information because it is something that is long overdue. It has been pushed under the rug and ignored. But today, inshallah, I'm hoping to unfold many realities of that particular time so that we could see causation to where we are today. So one area of their concern is that Muslims, the Black Muslims at that particular time, they made a pattern of reciting, "There is no God but Allah," and that Muhammad was the messenger of Allah. Now, keep in mind that Arabic wasn't that attuned to them, so they practiced and they made their prayers in English, but they rehearsed it repeatedly to themselves. And so with that, they were hoping that major change, they were very idealistic, but they were hoping that change would occur. So, and some of the things that they were hoping for would be to change society's outlook on Black America. And, but over time, conditions began to worsen for Black Muslims, particularly in the areas of which they lived. The changes in society came about where there was the movement from Europe to America regarding the nuclear family style. The society wanted change. They wanted change in their neighborhood. And they wanted Black Muslims to stop educating the public to become aware of the problem areas of society. So here we are, they're facing the reconstruction of themselves and yet the reconstruction of society that's taking place against what they want. So some of the things that happened at that time in their housing complex is that they were given an option to be a part of the nuclear family and reconstruct. So they introduced the idea of housing, but the condition of that is that the women had to be housed, let's say, had to agree to be housed with their children, but not the fathers. Another condition of that lifestyle is that they had to subject themselves to invasion, home invasion on an unannounced time. So which meant that the social worker of the mental health industry would come unexpectedly, search underneath the beds, look into the refrigerator, look into the closets, and spy to see if male presence were there. They had to hide the telephones with their neighbors to avoid conversation. Quite often, the women would force the children, if not whip their children, to make sure they would lie. They would not be honest when white social workers would come to the home and interrogate them regarding male presence. So this continued over time, where social workers would not only show up during the daytime, but also unexpectedly at night. Now, two Black Muslim women decided to do something opposite. And that was to address the social workers' mental health interrogation, to confront the government regarding the lack of rights and respect for its citizens. And so that too was met with some adversities. They also appealed to the judges to allow them to change their names from what they described the slave owner's name to names that they have chosen in Arabic. With organized complexities, the corporate organizations flooded their community with drugs and disparity, displaced the men, and there was a noticeable increase of depression, paranoia, fear, low self-esteem, drug addiction, poor diets because there was not enough adequate food in the neighborhood. They also witnessed tar and feathering and burning of other Black Muslims at that time, be it women, be it children. They also witnessed the rapes. They witnessed the lynching and dismembering of other Muslim members of the families or within the neighborhood. Many things occurred in that time. And so I just wanted to just give you that kind of outlook of where they stood in terms of their beliefs that the system was out against them and not in favor of their movement. So that's pretty much what I have to say. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Zakiyyah. So I just want to also, I would say, piggyback off of what Dr. Zakiyyah was saying, that according to scholars, 30% of slaves, Muslim slaves, came from Central and West Africa. Mm-hmm. And those individuals lost several things in that transition, which caused trauma, violence during slavery, robbing themselves of their language, their religious traditions, and their culture. And all of that trauma end up showing up now in their children's, their offsprings. According to some statistics, for instance, suicide attempts among Black youth increased 73% between 1991 to 2017. Major depression increased to 14% between 2015 to 2018. And now they're talking about among those individuals, they're seeing different kind of symptoms showing, manifesting. And we look at it through society, and we, as parents or friends, we try to normalize these events, saying that these are normal things that happen, but we forget to see that most of these things stem from abuse, neglect, witnessing violence in their community, in their home, and they're now showing up. So how do we address these, and how do we talk about these with individuals, with our Black Muslims? How do we support everyone? So we can talk about that.
Okay, thank you. Some of the things that I'd like to add to the forum is when Black Muslims attempted to organize their own educational system, that didn't go so well, because they attempted that, but then also they didn't, there was an economic shortage of books. And they also made attempts to go into immigrant communities to seek educational support. Some were able to succeed and some were not. There were also Muslims, Black Muslims, who weren't as economically deprived, but were able to navigate a little bit more effectively in society. And they they went into public school, were pretty much successful at some of their efforts. However, things began to show up. Particularly, my topic will focus on the overdiagnosing of the population of Black children, particularly boys, at that time in public school sector. I have on record that Black psychologists and let me see here. Black psychologist by the name of Robert L. Williams in 1976 was the first, along with Dr. Francis Sally Sumner in the 1920s and the 1950s, to identify the disparity and racism that was directed at Black children, Muslim Black children at that time, and Black children in general. It opened the door to a lawsuit that was made against the United States government, and it was called Brown versus Board of Education. That occurred at a time when they had implied that this was an implication that was made that Muslim Black children, or Black children in general, were at risk of education, were at risk of proper care by their parents, and that there was a need for moral training. Now, granted, they had family. There existed during that time the extended family, but that wasn't important for them, because the school district at that time in their area claimed it was not enough. So with the presidency of Obama, he passed a law for the NCLB, which was No Child Left Behind, in 2001, that affected what Congress had enacted, which was the public law of 94-142. Now, when you have all of these systems focusing on Black children and placing them in special education, they're not well tested, they're not well assessed, the teachers are not familiar with all the nuance about Black culture, and et cetera, problems occur. And some of the problems that we've seen over time in my testing of children is that once the teachers ignite or inform the school psychologist or the psychologist outside that there is a problem with a child, they alert the parents and identify that the child is not functioning at grade level. Now, there could be a discrepancy between ability or a style of learning. However, that discrepancy exists, or it could be a behavior problem. So a list of battery assessments are made. As I mentioned before, there's a meeting with the staff of the school. They obtain data from them. There is a diagnosis that is obtained for the sake of the insurance companies. And there is the IEP, or the 504 plan enact. And also they review the cumulative file. Now, granted, if the schools were not up to date with files, particularly some of the Islamic schools and some of the regular schools, there's going to be missing information. So assessors, be it school psychologists, the program specialists, teachers, they're going to miss this information. However, it didn't stop the process of the labeling and the referral for special ed. And we have seen that over time, since the early 40s, that Muslims children and also racism was the underlying area of report writing, a lack of understanding about the child in general, and a lack of understanding about the historical child in general. So in addition to what we've said before, when you look at trauma, and trauma existed in the community, it had a role to play with these children. However, it was never recognized as a concerning item in the reports of the psychologist and the school. The goal was to label the child as special ed. And it was successfully done by the school. Now, you can use any instrument to determine the ability of the child, but one of those, and I just sort of sketched this out here so we could see it, that bell curve there is a unique feature that was used back in the 1940s. Excuse me, in the 1940s. Now, with the bell curve, you have the midpoint here at the top of the line here, which is, it is called the distribution, the norm of distribution. So when you're in the middle of that bell curve, that bell curve creates the if the scores indicate more to the left, then that means that child is in trouble. If the scores lean more to the right, then that is a functional child. But if the assessor is biased, has already a bias toward the child, and the child has an anxiety, a child has been traumatized, and the child is not familiar with the tester or the assessor, then that will influence the outcome of that bell curve. But again, what goes noticed is the report and the assessment of those people within the school district. And henceforth, that child will be moved automatically into special ed, which is not equipped to deal with that child. And in most cases, the child will sit uneducated for months and months on. So if, Tephiny, if you'd like to add a little bit to it, or on testing and assessments from another angle, you could.
So another, I would say, unique pain and grief that Black Muslim experience is depression and anxiety. And according to some scholars, our own Jacob experienced the same thing. He said, Jacob, when cried out to our Lord, I have been touched with adversity, and you are the most merciful of the merciful. So we talk about having experienced diversity in our lives, and our scholars talk about it as well. So it does exist. Most of us tend to put down depression, anxiety among our people, and don't seek treatments for these symptoms. One thing that that I see in most of my talks with my clients is that they don't seek therapy, or they don't talk about it until it's too late. And for us to start talking about it among ourselves or family, we need to be educated on how it looks. And not just wait for a therapist to tell you this is how what's going on with you. Because most of the time we see that we get diagnosed for certain things, mostly it's based on our skin color. One thing that I've seen in the past is we get that explosive disorder. It's just because they see us as an angry person and nothing else. And so we have to get more educated on how these symptoms manifest, how we can take control over it before we end up getting prescribed medication. As Dr. Zakiyyah says, that we are always over medicated. So let's see how we can work on getting different techniques and tools to support ourselves as Muslims.
So I mentioned earlier, I'm sorry, did I?
You're good.
Okay, good. Okay, I mentioned earlier that there were two Muslim women who were very instrumental in the awakening period of that era. Basically, some of the things that that they did was to educate residents. I mean, they had all kinds of classes to educate about landlord-tenant awareness, about cleanliness, about school rights, about children's rights, and it made an impact when it came to attending a child who was diagnosed with a learning disability or ADHD or ADD or somewhere on that spectrum of autism. Was not on the spectrum for Muslim Black children at that particular time until the advent of drug addiction. Now, excuse me. And so what happened through that period, that long period of education, was insightful. They became empowered. Changes were being made. And guess what? Government intervened. They set up new regulations. So the programs had to end because it was no longer funded. Even though they were aware of the process, but they were not allowed to continue the process. So here we're talking about a system where the mother made every attempt to be an advocate for her child. The extended family participated in that process. However, again, the programs were shut down because they didn't want that kind of awareness to exist. That leads me on to anxiety. Now, anxiety was coupled with all of this. I mean, imagine a kid living in this environment, and what they're seeing constantly. And it's not like the average person living in the suburbs, when they get off the bus or they get someone to pick them up from school, they're able to go home and see dogs, cats, children playing. I mean, it's a wholesome environment. And they may see or hear something pleasant in the neighborhood. But for these children, they heard cars running down the street, running into houses, gunshots, people screaming, people being thrown from the projects, tall high rises, thrown from the buildings, or having to travel up the elevator and seeing all kinds of whatever, urine, feces, or whatever within the elevator. So you're going into the system and you're looking at the substandard living condition that you're faced with every day. And, so this is an added stress. This is an added anxiety for children. But what happened is that the Black Muslims of America decided to arm themselves, because even though the awareness schools had shut down, they managed to meet in their homes. I mean, that showed resilience. They managed to meet in the park. They managed to meet in community centers in order to continue fighting for their rights and the rights of their children. They noticed and they identified some things that had been placed within the records of the child: anxiety, stress that related to child's ability to learn. And we can see that some of the things that they did was make every attempt to apply Islam and some aspect of Islam, the Quran and Hadith, to help their child. So they came up with meal times. And so they had people who said, well, we can provide meals for the daycare, or we can provide meals for the schools. And they would drop off these meals for the children so they would have an adequate diet. So that became an active forum for them in order to reduce a lot of the anxiety and stress in children's lives. Some were effective and some were not. Parents reminded their children when they get home to make the salat. So if they were anxious, they weren't anxious at home. If they had worries, they weren't worried that much at home, at least not noticed. Because at that particular time, we have to keep in mind that there was a vernacular known item that was said among the elders, that what you hear and what you see, you stay quiet. In other words, zip your lip. You don't say anything about it for fear that harm would come to the family or to the child. Now, that was something that was stemming from slavery, and also it became a carryover into their day-to-day lives. And why does it continue to exist? Because the elders have held themselves true to this, and some of the younger people incorporated the same principle, is that the secret exists with them until the grave. In other words, I should say it goes in the grave with them. So they ignored the realities of problems that were pretty obviously obviously faced with, whether it was sleep disorder or acting out in the classrooms or in the home setting. They ignored these things because they said, if you ignore it, it'll go away. So some of the practices they used when they saw, let's say, their children that were anxious or for themselves, music and drumming, plenty of outside food and entertainment that calmed them down. And thinking about pleasant things and not worrying about the adversities that were occurring in the neighborhood. So those were some of the things that they attempted to apply to the best of their ability, not ignoring the realities that as this child is growing up, things may not be the same. Okay.
I know we can talk about how we address these issues and how we address these pains. And one thing that we do have to learn and know is, like, according to David Williams from the National Institute on Health, he states that 23% of Black report every single day discrimination. That builds up into trauma. That causes people to have little ability to make decisions, to respond to stress, attention, and society sees that as ADHD, as anxiety, as something else. And we fail to see that although we have these things going on in our everyday, we are also very resilient, and we know how to support ourselves, how to manage our own emotions, how to behave around individuals. When we open up and talk about all of these trauma that we have to, let's say, somebody that is outside of our religion, outside of our culture, they first have to add a label to it. So let's see how we can open to another Muslim, another African American, somebody that knows our culture, knows where we come from, and see how that individual can support us to become more resilient. So again, it starts with us having open communication and open feelings. Our males, for one thing, they are built to not show that much emotion. They are built to be that tough person. And so we have to open that wall and show them that no, you can be open with us. You can start talking to us, start communicating, because that's where we learn what's going on and how we can support you. So again, and this is one thing that Dr. Zakiyyah talks about, that extended family. When students go away to college, they cut off that family, but we need to learn how to keep them with us, how to communicate what's going on, and how they are able to address those issues that come up. And also, as we talked about, how do we create that Muslim community where we create wellness? That's something that we have to work on, to be at peace when people talk about their personal life and their personal experience, and not be as judgmental as our society is.
I'd like to add to that is that when we talk about the Black Muslim history, and I'm just going to tie this in together, is that when they were in fight or flight, not everyone remained in the United States. Some left to go to Saudi Arabia. Some went to Abiquiu, New Mexico to live because Saudi had purchased land there. Some went to the South and lived among a place called Al Medina. So, and some just generally left, period. They took their family, picked up, and left. Some went to the West Coast in order to live, to maintain some sort of sense. Those who left to the Middle East and other countries came back, and what they came back with was hope. And so some of the things that they saw and they started educating people about. Now, again, this is, the government had changed. There were people had settled into the nuclear family construct. Kids were already messed up. Parents were already messed up. They were single head of household. Men had left the home. Drug addiction was all over the place. Prostitution and pimping was just prevalent. It was a hot mess. So when they came and began to interact with people in those areas. They started an educational program. And with that, here comes the ideal environment. So some of the things that they talked about, okay, well, because social workers were still invading their homes and still putting pressure on them. If they didn't comply, they would lose their funding. And so basically they said this, according to Islam, now the application of Islam is beginning to take place in a desperate situation. The basic principles under, as they quoted, the basic principles under client therapy relationship, be it school or off school setting, because they saw the need that mental health was needed at this point, is to get to know, is for the therapist is to get to know the client's background, be more familiar. So they became an advocate for mom and her child. They went there, they had these organizations, and they went with them with this kind of language. They said the effects of wellness process serves as a strength and bond between therapist and client relationship. Each therapist should base their, even though their skills may be different in ability and approach, the key factor in dealing with a Muslim is different than dealing with a non-Muslim because they're not coming from the same criteria. So they try to push the envelope to say, you need to study more about Allah and the Quran and things like that to educate the school system. And did it work? We'll talk about it later. They tried to educate the social worker. I mean, it came to a point the social worker refused to come because they would stand in the doorway to ask and interrogate the social worker. So the social worker ultimately gave up. But basically, what they did was encourage new values, encourage strength to make change in light of the adversities that people were experiencing at that particular time, and that was welcomed. Would you like to add something?
So let's move on to how do we create this wellness around us? How do we create a community where we're safe to address mental health, to address the trauma that we've been through? How do we do that without getting labels, getting stigmas? How do we are able to open up without people saying, well, you need medication, you need this to get through that, or, oh my gosh, I can't believe you went through that, and then move on. Let's see how we can sit in the conversation and make sure that when you walk away from that conversation, that person felt that they were heard, that they were understood for what they're going through, and know that there's someone else out there who understood them and is able to support them on their journey. So I know Dr. Zakiyyah talked about Santa Clara Masjid and how they explore that Medina period. You want to elaborate on that?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so one of the things that this is something that happened on the West Coast. And as I mentioned, when you're bringing immigrants to the West Coast, when you're bringing those Muslims the Black Muslims that were there in the critical time of life. Now, granted, they seemed to be more functional because they grew up outside of the area. So they weren't affected by the same pressures and racism and bigotry and labeling that the ones who stayed behind. So here they are, some of them ended up on the West Coast. So let's look at this prototype between the 1980s to 2010. This prototype was different. Unlike the ones that you may see in different locations throughout the United States where Black Muslims exist. Where they are across the other states, you see the line of demarcation. You see the masjid of the Black Muslims, the masjid of the Bosnian, the masjid of the Arabs, and the masjids of the Indo-Pakistanis, all divided. But what we have seen, what we did, we had people travel and they brought back this kind of wisdom. Why don't we create the new prototype? So here we are in California, and we're looking at what was brought to us. And we look more specifically at why don't we, since the environment is already diverse, you had Yemenis, you had people from Palestine, you had Indian and Pakistanis from various regions, you had Asians, you had every walk of life in California. And some of the things that they did, we, as a women folk, meeting together for a weekly Halakha intervention. This is a go-to. Meet weekly for, and the men did the same thing to upgrade their skills. Secondly, they started an Islamic school. Very base, started with the little kids, and they took part in the education and formation of the minds. So people didn't mind going to the small Islamic educational school. Now, again, we're talking about an international community as that new prototype. From that, this took about, let's say, an estimated of 15 to 20 years of a span of time. But the motivation was there behind the women and Muslim men that were there. And again, it was not a matter of the Black Muslim, it was a matter of international behavior. So the education was one, the ongoing halakas, and then they started planning socials. And the socials may entail outside socials of the home, going camping, and having some parties at the homes to generate social ability and mannerisms. They brought their families from overseas, and guess what? Then the Black Muslims said, okay, I'm gonna bring my family, bring my parents to visit. And so there was an overlapping and also the copying, and they saw positive results. People began to interact, visit each other. People began to experience, these were like non-Muslims, and Muslims began to visit international homes and sat with them and ate and had good social times together. So they had mentorships for the children. They had big celebrations, especially during Ramadan and Eid. They would decorate the homes, decorate outside, and also incorporate some of what is done here, get the kids all dressed up, and then they go to the masjid. The masjid became a flavored place to be. There was also social activity there. So it became contagious. They started a charity group where they began to cook. There were women who were just this massive cooking skills. And they would take foods to homes of Muslims in the community who needed food, clothing, and the mass just got involved in that as well. They were also involved in making sure that the men who were unemployed become employed. So they created these jobs because they opened up supermarkets. They opened up all kinds of marketplaces. The place was flooded with marketplaces. Or if it were engineering, they would help that and support that person. Or if they were in prison and they were being paroled, they had a parole setting for the ex-offenders, and they would come out and help them and assist them in acclimating to the society. Some women even married based on those conditions, and they shipped them out to their country to get more social ability. A lot of the more socials added up where they started organizing dress-up parties, weddings that were elaborate, but who did it? It was the community that organized these settings, because the end goal was to decrease divorce, increase marriages. And excessive volunteer work, and I mentioned the donations, and bringing, visiting the sick, also visiting various places of conferences and meeting with different people, sharing their ideologies and not being afraid to speak out. This was the prototype. So it increased the bond between the Muslims, the immigrant Muslims to those Black Muslims and white Muslims, and as such. So it became a positive prototype for resources, problem solving, and communication. It was a good time.
Thank you so much. Sister Tephiny, do you mind ending us with just a little bit of a summary of what the Black community can do to attain wellness, and then a call to action for the rest of the community to provide these safe spaces?
So one thing that I would say is that we have to start with our young children. We have to start with educating them on how to be able to explore and talk about how they're feeling. There's a saying that says that a research, I think it is, 1 in every 3 Black children have been exposed to at least 2 to 8 adverse childhood experience. And with that being said, how do we work with them so that they know that those are not normal experience in everyone's life? We can't say that for our counterparts, Black, Asian. We can never have those statistics, but it's the community that we live in that we keep seeing children come out of, and we're not supporting them. How much of those individuals that their school have a nurse on site, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or even a social worker that they can walk into every single day and talk to? So we, as parents, adults, we need to start advocating for those little things in the school. We need to start having those tangible things being accessible to everyone. We can create it in our community, in our masjid. Can we have a psychiatrist on hand, someone who is able to see someone at the drop of a dime? Or have a phone call with a 24-hour service where it's just for emotional support. Most people, although they have that close family, that close friend, they want something that's not biased. Because when you go to your girlfriend, they're gonna be like, oh, let's get the person. But you want someone will be more objective and give you something that's based on your belief, on your religion, on how life's supposed to be. And so we have to start working on having a safe space created in our masjid, in our homes, in our school. And let's see how us as a Black Muslim can start creating that, having that dialogue on where we can create that safe space. So I'll end it with that.
I'd like to add something to that. For Black Muslim families of the nuclear family style who managed to isolate themselves from the extended family, a good thread that we could share as a healer is to find a common thread toward communication without penalty, without punishment, without bringing up at the onset of a visit those negatives, but focus on other aspect of building positive relationships first. Build that bond and continue the communication, continue working with the extended family, because we don't know if they have felt what you have felt, but at least start on the onset as communication, with communication.
Jazakumullah khairan. We really appreciate your time. We're going to move to the Q&A soon. We do have some questions already in the chat in the Q&A box. We will have some links posted in the chat with some additional resources and toolkits that some organizations have put together. That way the conversation doesn't end now. It's more of an opener so that we can, inshallah, do our work afterwards. So Sister Zakiyyah will post those in the chat. She also posted a feedback form. We would like to always improve our programming. So if you can take about 2 minutes to do that at some point today. And also Dr. Zakiyyah and Sister Tephiny both offer therapy services, and information about that will also be posted in the chat in case anybody feels the need to, to do some counseling, inshallah, afterwards. So I will go ahead and share some of those questions. I will actually begin with some comments that were in the chat in case you missed them. As somebody mentioned, most of the time you don't know how to express your feelings. I know Sister Tephiny, you were talking a little bit about that being a barrier. So if you want to elaborate on what are ways we can express our feelings in a healthy way.
So I know most people, when they get uncomfortable or there's something very emotional that comes up, they tend to laugh it off or say, I'll talk about it another time. For us, we need to sit in that conversation and ask the question again, and let them know that it is safe to cry. It is safe to say anything to me, because everything that you talk about is just between both of us. And let them know, if this is the time for you to cry, let's do it. Let's get out that feeling. That's how we start working on what's the deep root of the emotion that you're going through right now. So start talking with just, how are you doing today? And wait for them to answer that question. And then just the nodding, it's okay. There's a little thing that I have on my board that says, when somebody says it's okay, there's something going on deeper than that. When somebody smiles and say, oh my God, I had a good day, they really had a good day. But it's those little sights that you hear in their voice or you see on their face. Make sure you are very attentive, so when they say certain things, you can address it right away.
Thank you so much, Sister Tephiny. Dr. Zakiyyah, I think this question would be appropriate for you because you were talking about the special ed and the school systems. The sister said, I have a friend from Ethiopia whose 3-year-old daughter is being labeled as autistic and her mom is being pressured to send her to a special ed school. What resources could she use to fight back against this labeling?
Well, one of the resources that's available to her is a book that is published for special ed, and it is for parents. So it's written by a man by the name of Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, Peter W.D. Wright. And this is, and I'll just show this right here. This is a great resource guide. Okay, and having a resource guide and you're sitting together with other women and just other families and in discussion, this is an empowered book. So the more we know about the rights of ourselves as parents to the right of your child, you become the best advocate. I have seen at many IEPs and 504 meetings regarding children, a whole team of families show up. Because if you're going alone, it's you feel intimidated by the jargon, by the language that you're unfamiliar. If there is a language barrier, you can request an interpreter. So these are some of the rights that are available to you. If you or your children feel that the assessment was not up to par, that there may have been some bias, review it, look through the book to see what areas that you can use to apply to those areas of concern. It's an easy reader for at a parent level, and I think you'll understand it and use it.
I know my son started moving around because I moved a lot when I was doing schooling, and my son is the only child, so his resilience, he makes friends easily. He is very vocal with getting to know individuals. The school he moved into, again, it's because of the high level that the school is in. We moved him into that school district. they're not used to kids who are that functional, that's so attached to making friends and vocal. And the first few days in, I would say about a week, so there, I got a email saying, we think we need to do an assessment on your son for ADHD. My first thing was, that's his resilience showing up. After the first 2 weeks of him making friends, you will see the difference. Don't do anything without my consent. 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, not a single word. So you got to stand up for your child. You know how your child is at home. You know that's the setting that they're comfortable with. They won't change going to a school. They will have that same reaction at school. So let them be aware of it on the first few days, because some of them come in, some of the teachers come in with, they want a perfect setting, but that's not how students are.
And there are times when teachers want a quiet room, and they want this kid to be quiet. So they're going to they're the first to raise their hand to say, medicate, because I don't want to do the work, and I think this kid needs to be quiet so I can have a quiet room. So, so sometimes it takes finding a teacher of match and skills that's in tune to your child's need. And you have the right to switch classrooms. You have that right. And if the school is not able to match your need, and you've done all the assessments, or if you haven't done the assessment, there is always another school or other teachers. So you do have an option. You don't have to settle for one teacher.
Yeah, yep. They also have teacher's aid. If your classroom doesn't have a teacher's aid, request one, because that means that the teacher gets that extra support for the students then. And sometimes they're put down because the parents are not stepping in asking for the resource. If your student needs an extra support, you step in and make sure that you're vocal with the principal there. Let them know that classroom needs a teacher aid, get it done.
Yes. In addition to requesting a student study team meeting, whereby you're able to bring in medical or pediatric report. The pediatrics will make an assessment to rule out whatever they're claiming, or rule in to the claim of whatever is present. So you can have your pediatrician, or you can have as many people that you desire to attend this SST is what they call it, the student study team meeting, to reveal the content of concern so that you can best advocate for your child in a learning setting. And always get a copy. Always get copies. Never walk out of there with a signature and they have the copies. You're entitled to a copy of the CUME file, and you're entitled to the signature page. So that's your right.
There was a similar question. I think, I don't know if you want to supplement it, but I think the answer would probably be similar. It says, can you speak to options available to parents to exit their children out of special ed, especially when special ed referral was unnecessary clinician error bias? So I think it's very similar to the previous questions. Is there anything you wanted to add to it?
The exit process is a little different. You can't just arbitrarily pull out. So it's a due process, as they call it. It's called due process. And so the due process is that SST that I just mentioned. That's the starting point. And then the parent writes a letter to the school, principal, administrator, and the teacher, mainly the administrative people, that you are requesting this exit by such and such a time. So you will bring, so that, in doing so, they will bring the team to the table along with the resource specialist to listen to your concern and to make sure teachers' reports are all aligned and you've done all your interventions like remedial reading or someone you've hired to confirm that those scores, that your scores are current and above the performance of the school. So it's not just, I feel that I need to remove, it is a due process. And the reason why, if something happens in the academic world by making that move away from where they are, they may be held liable. So, they always say, cover your butt, bring your proof to claim the exit. And it is a due process of exiting, because all signatures, again, are necessary for the exiting process. Now, even though you exit, you can leave a clause that in case something happens in the future, you could re-enter.
Inshallah. There was a follow-up, Sister Tephiny, to your answer about emotions. The question, it was in the chat, what about if the person that triggered or caused the trauma doesn't want to hear or allow you to express yourself?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time for me?
Yeah, it says in the chat, so you were talking about emotions and importance of expressing ourselves and our feelings. So the response was, what if the person that triggered or caused the trauma doesn't want to hear or allow you to express yourself?
You know what, I've had that question several times from just clients talking about it. One thing that I always talk about, there's different ways for you to express what happened to you to maybe that individual. For instance, sexual abuse, or I would say domestic violence. It's very hard for you to talk to that individual about what they've done to you, especially when it's one-on-one in person, and that person doesn't want to hear it because they really don't believe that they've harmed you in any way at all. So you can do this in two different ways. One, write a letter. It takes so much for you to write down how you feel and leave it for that individual so that they, one, can read and have the option to not respond or have the option to respond, because you don't want to be the aggressor when you come to talking to someone. They might feel that you're being aggressive with them. So write a letter. Another one that you can do is start journaling. It helps when you journal how you feel, your past experience, and take note of how you're moving on over that. And possibly if you still want to confront that individual about what they've done to you, you can pass a journal to them and tell them it's on them if they want to talk about it after they finish reading. But this is how it's affected you in your life, and they don't need to talk to you, but this is how you want them to know how you feel right now.
I'd like to add to that, if I may. Prayer is a very powerful tool. And sometimes when we're limited to a conversation or the use of the right word in the right setting, or we may feel shy about our approach, we can take that to prayer. Prayer is a powerful source, and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you, just talk to Allah like you're talking to it's like a person in front of you, and just ask Allah to give you the tools, the time, the words to be able to bring this out to this person in the most effective way so that it's understood rather than being misunderstood. And just take that and over time, you'll get that strength. Over time, that opportunity, inshallah, will open up where you're able to express that thought in a realistic way, inshallah.
Jazakallah khairan. So we have another question. What can we do to support our adolescent other than medication?
Oh, wow. There's so much tools to work with. First of all, I always talk about meditation, changing someone's diet, um, even working with different counseling, expressive art, especially when it comes to adolescent, how to use their time effectively. There's also culturally based healing art for you to use. Um, I know, for instance, I also have, I use you say animal therapy. I bought a puppy for my dog. That takes up a lot of his time. um, but it's always about that self care. How do you have your adolescent move from different transition during the day, from school back to home, doing chores, homework, um, even in college, this applies to them. From getting up in the morning, what do you do? Do you pray, then go to class, maybe have your side job, study? But in that full day, where is the self-care happening? Where do you add that in to make sure that you're taking that time for yourself? How are you doing meditation? How are you exercising to keep healthy? What did you eat? Keep a journal of how your diet is, because little things that change in your day actually adds up over time and it affects you. So keep a journal of how your day went, so that when something happened, you can go back and see what's going on. But there's so much ways for you to change how someone moves from medication. And I always say, start with meditation, start with changing your diet, your exercise, and your routine for the day, and see how it helps. And I don't want to say just get off medication. And please make sure, if you're on meds, check with your doctor. Make sure that they know that that's what you want to do and how to get off safely and what are the consequences.
With the also with adolescence, it's that age of discernment. It's an age where they're learning right from wrong, and judgment is very important. So in their cognitive world, and as their body is going through all these physiological and emotional changes, is storytelling. There's so many stories that can relate to their age that will tie into what they're going through on an emotional level and psychological level and behavior. You tie those in, and then parents get involved in taking them to the masjid so they can meet other men or other females, and they have these social circles where they're learning and having the discussion, because they're approaching, the goal is to get them through that time period to adult life successfully. So their concerns is very real, and let them ask questions, and always keep the channels of communication open with them, and listen to them, and listen to some of the things that they say, which could be very functional, and try not to treat them as children when we want them to be like an adult.
Inshallah. And we will end with this one comment, which I'm going to turn into a question in case we do have educators on the group. The sister says, sometimes teachers lack these emotional intelligence and knowledge for not making the teaching about themselves and how they want to teach, instead having a mindset to teach and educate the child according to their potential and abilities. So maybe we can end with some advice for educators or anybody who works with children and adolescents on how to increase, I guess, that emotional intelligence.
I know I've always been taught that not every single person learn the same way. There's tangible. I was doing math when I went to Cal, and doing studies with these students. I've always known that you touch, you feel something, you see something, you read something. They're all different senses that you're using. And not all students use these senses together. Some of them pick two of them, and that's how they learn. Teachers need to figure out how to communicate with all these four senses to make sure that one of them will get through. Most of them come in with an agenda, write on the board, and that's it. They need to figure out how to move and nurture these students with all of these 4 senses?
To add to that, the SST spreadsheet is a useful tool for parents and teachers and administrative staff, whereby you can hold teacher accountable to something that is in writing. And so when you look at the strength of the child, the weakness of the child, and you look at interventions and a timeline that these interventions need to be addressed, and what they do, and describe them in detail, will help teacher understand specifically what the needs are. And we set up a follow-up date. So that's it. And don't spread it out too far, but make it soon where parent is involved in the Q&A. So that SST is very, very important to holding teacher accountable and parents as well.
Inshallah. Thank you so much, Dr. Zakiyyah and Sister Tephiny, for discussing and allowing us to learn from you today. And thank you, attendees. I do want to share quickly our resources. So if you, are you able to see the screen? Are we good?
There we go.
Okay, alhamdulillah. So if you enjoyed, inshallah, this event and you don't want to have FOMO and miss any of our other events, you can follow us on all of our social media channels. Also, if you feel like you benefited in any way, please consider donating to Maristan. The donation link will be in the chat so that we can continue, inshallah, having these resources for our wonderful community. And inshallah, we will end with dua together. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya Allah, thank you for gathering us here this evening and allow us to always have a heart that feels for others. We thank you, Allah, for allowing us to make it here, accept our intentions to get closer to you. We ask you, Allah, to place love between all of our hearts, increase our love for you and towards your messengers, and provide us the health and strength to worship you the way you like to be worshipped. Ya Allah, expand our hearts and facilitate our affairs. Have mercy on our weakness and calm our anxieties. Accept our works, rectify our affairs, and preoccupy us with our remembrance of you. Make us prefer goodness, grant us above and beyond what we hope for. O most merciful of those who show mercy, make us a source of blessing and mercy for others. Unite the hearts of everybody in this room, everyone who intended to be here and everyone who is not here with us. Grant love, compassion, and empathy between our hearts and souls, and provide us with the strength to continually uplift each other. Ya Allah, we ask you for the humility of the humble and the companionship of the upright. We ask you for abundance in every goodness and immunity from every harm. Ya Allah, grant us a solution and a way out of every concern that troubles us, and grant us provision from where we do not anticipate it. Ya Allah, grant us a resolution and a way out of our troubles. Inspire our hearts to be grateful for you in every situation. Make us aware of the value of your blessings through their ceaseless continuation. There is no strength or power except through you, the most exalted and majestic. Ya Allah, we each have personal struggles we are dealing with, and you promise with hardship there will always be ease. Remove from our hearts any fears or inhibitions, and replace them with an ever-increasing boldness to live each moment as best as we can. Ya Allah, some of us are carrying personal trauma or trauma passed on from previous generations. Ya Allah, grant us strength and resilience and break the trauma from passing down to our children. Ya Allah, the burdens of life sometimes seem too heavy to bear. The anxiety and anguish that sits inside of us feels bigger at times than the world around us. Give us audacious hearts that can overcome that pain inside, hearts that help us to carry each burden with ease, regardless of how heavy it seems. Make us people who find strength through selflessness and not selfishness, and sincerity, not self-centeredness. Ya Allah, forgive us for our shortcomings and guide and bless us all. Subhanak Allahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Glory is to you, O Allah, and praise is to you. I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship but you. I seek your forgiveness and repent to you. Ameen. Please don't forget that we do have resources for therapists on maristan.org/resources. We also posted therapy services with our wonderful speakers in the chat. So if you want to gather all of that right now, And don't forget to support us, inshallah, as well. And we look forward to seeing you in our next healing or learning circle. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Walaikum salam.